and welcome to The Dark Side of Relationships. I'm Dr. Katie Dunleavy. I'm an associate professor here in the communication department at Salle University. And with me today is Dr. Jennifer Bevan, who is visiting us from Chapman University. Dr. Bevan's work deals with a lot of different elements that have to do with what we call the dark side, some of the negative aspects of personal relationships, and how to climb out of some of those situations that you're in. So welcome, Dr. Bevan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. First of all, you've had just a really interesting story. You grew up on the East Coast, then you were down in the South for a while, now you're out west in California. So tell me a little bit about how you've made the transitions and some of the decisions you've made to go to that particular trajectory.
I grew up in Delaware, and I went to University of Delaware for undergrad, and I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know what kind of writer I wanted to be. So I knew I wrote in the school newspaper in high school, and I was in mass comm as a mass comm major at Delaware. And I took mass comm classes all the way through, and then the department actually recruited me to stay for their MA program.
Okay.
And once they did that, I had to take more of the interpersonal side of classes, and I took an interpersonal theory class with my thesis advisor, Dr. Wendy Samter, and I just fell in love with interpersonal, and I kind of abandoned mass comm. And from there, I just started reading a bunch of the research and the assigned research for the class, and beyond that, and did an independent study, and that's where I kind of stumbled upon the jealousy research. I read an article about it, a study that had been done by Dr. Laura Guerrero, who's at Arizona State University, and is very well known in jealousy, and I just kind of fell in love, and that was it. I did my master's thesis on jealousy. I went down to University of Georgia for my PhD. I did jealousy for my dissertation. I've written a book on jealousy that came out last year for Peter Lang Press, and that's kind of been the underlying area of research for me, and I've kind of gone into different places and different areas from that, but that's kind of my true first love.
Okay. And so it's interesting to me, when I also really like the dark side, but I think it's when people hear, oh, I fell in love with jealousy, that kind of sounds sort of strange to people. So what was it about jealousy as a topic that you were just so drawn to?
Honestly, I was in the midst of a relationship where I was kind of dealing with a jealous partner, and was wondering why and how and what to do about it, and being a new scholar, kind of approaching it from that sort of logical, empirical viewpoint, I figured, well, if I do research on it, then I can figure out what the issue is. Long story short, I did not figure out what the issue was, and we broke up. But I think it's a really misunderstood experience, because if you're jealous, your intention is usually a positive one. You want to preserve your relationship. You have something that you care about, and that you don't want to have, be threatened, or a rival take away, or something like that. But I think that there are so many different negative ways that you can go about dealing with it that people tend to think of it as just being universally dark. And it's actually not. I think it can be a good way to wake you up and preserve the relationship. And most of the studies that I've done, and most of the studies that I've reviewed, the participants report, now of course, whether they actually do it or not, but they report that they tend to prefer being constructive and open and just kind of confessing their jealousy to their partner, and they don't tend to prefer those really negative forms of jealousy that we tend to immediately think of when we think of jealousy. So I think it's misunderstood. I think it can have some positive, and research has borne out that it does have some positive relational implications sometimes, and so I think it's complexity, I think, is what draws me to it.
A common thing that I hear often, and I'm sure you have too, is people get confused about the difference between our field and especially psychology. So when we think about jealousy, a lot of people want to know the motivations, why someone's behaving that way, which is a little bit more into the psychological realm. So for you, in terms of what you commonly have seen in your research in how people communicate jealousy, how they express it, what behavioral outcomes that they do, what are some of the most common things that you see people doing to express their jealousy?
There are 11 different ways that you are supposedly able to communicate jealousy, and jealousy is very much tied in with social psychology. So when we think of a jealousy experience, there are very few things that all the people who study jealousy and all the different disciplines agree upon, but I think we can all agree that there's an experience and an expression. So the experience is that social psychology. It's the thoughts, it's the emotions, and then those feed into how you actually communicate it. And it can be any way from pursuing the rival and telling them to lay off. It can be violence, which, jealousy is a very big motivator for domestic violence and intimate partner violence. It can be, thankfully those are fairly rare. It can be trying to make yourself look better. And that one's called compensatory restoration, where you're kind of trying to make yourself look more attractive, more appealing to your partner, so that they kind of theoretically forget about the rival and renew their interest in you. And then also just the discussions, and those discussions can be positive discussions, or they could be really heated ones where you're threatening and yelling and being sarcastic and so on. So it's mostly the constructive ones, though, that the participants report using. So that's the one good thing. But again, we have to always take into consideration that they might be trying to sound as if they are good relational partners when they fill those surveys out.
Right. So you mentioned some of these positive ones. You were sort of alluding to some of those as you were talking about them just now. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you see as some of the positive outcomes of the jealousy and the ways that we express it?
One of the things that I got really interested in was there was a lot of research on the jealous individual, but when I was in my PhD program at Georgia, I was realizing there wasn't a lot about what the jealous, I call them the jealousy target, what their experience is. So once that expression is out there, how does that partner, who is the one that is, apparently communicating with a rival, or is at least perceived to be, possibly you might lose that relationship or something like that. What do they think? What do they do? And we have found, thankfully, that if the jealous individual comes at you with a positive message, this bothered me. I saw you talking to this person at a party. I didn't think it was going to bother me so much, but it did, and I realized how much, I care about you, and I don't want to lose the relationship. The jealousy target is going to typically respond positively as well. So it can have those positive implications. And those positive communication messages tend to be related to higher satisfaction with the relationship and more investment with the relationship. So you not only enjoy and are content with the relationship, but you also become a little bit more invested in it. It becomes a little bit more a part of you, and you're going to work harder to kind of keep it going. So that's good.
Yeah, that definitely is. We've talked a lot about romantic relationships. Have you explored this in friendships? And I know that in terms of family relationships, sibling rivalry can kind of come into this. There's a lot. There does seem to be overlap, but do you explore that, or do you mainly focus on the romantic relationships?
I at first was actually really interested in how male-female friendships dealt with jealousy.
Okay.
And this is way back from my thesis, so I don't know if I can remember the results specifically. But we looked at different types of jealousy. So not just romantic jealousy, jealousy about other friends, jealousy about family members, jealousy about just even having an intimate relationship with someone else, sharing secrets and stuff that the other person maybe isn't privy to. And there is definitely cross-sex friend jealousy. It's a whole other layer of complexity to add to that type of relationship, which is already fraught with rules that are easily broken and all sorts of issues with sexuality when you're not supposed to have a sexual relationship with a cross-sex friend and so on. And then even though I don't have any siblings, ironically, I was also interested in sibling jealousy, so I did do a study on that as well. And we looked at adult siblings, because there's been a great deal of research in the family studies area and also in psychology, clinical psychology and child psychology about sibling rivalry. The word rivalry is actually misused, because rivalry implies that there are two people going for something that neither of them possess and that one of them will win it. With a parent, you know that you do possess their love. So I actually technically think that it is also jealousy. It's that both are trying to get sort of their piece of the pie, as it were, but it is something that they do possess, and certainly a parent can make things better or worse depending on how they respond to that. But we found that young adults, college students, do continue to experience jealousy in their relationships with their siblings. The one difference that we found is in most studies, romantic and friendships, et cetera, they report that they are going to be more likely to be positive and direct in their jealousy expression. We found that the adult siblings were going to avoid. They did not want to talk about it. That was their most prevalent preference of expressing jealousy. And of all the studies that I've done and reviewed and looked at, I think that was one of the only ones where we found that. So it seems to be something that's unique to the adult sibling relationship. Maybe they just realize it's not worth it, or it's not worth their time, or or it's so past it, that whole thing's been going on their whole lives, or they are embarrassed about it, that it's still something that they experience, even though they should be, grown up and maybe kind of beyond that. So.
And so do you mean that they don't express that to each other, or don't express it
to
at
each other?
all?
Yeah.
Okay.
They might tell someone else, but when we ask those questions, we ask them, do you express it to the other person?
I see. Okay. Now, you brought up the idea of male-female cross-sex friendships, and something that I always get is that people want to know sex differences. They want to know how do men and women differ, and a lot of times in communication studies we just don't see that big of a difference.
Right.
And so did you see that type of thing in your research with jealousy?
It's funny, there is one type of jealousy that females do tend to express significantly more than males. And remember, there are 11 different types.
Right.
There used to be 14. They've been compressed down to 11 because 14 was just so many. One of those has been across different studies, different samples, females do use it more than males, and that is the direct positive communication. It's called integrative communication. So they want to talk about it. They want to share it. They want to discuss it, and express their love and be calm and so forth. And that kind of goes along with the fact that women tend to be more mindful of their relationships. They are the ones that are keeping kind of track and make sure things are going okay and so on. So that is the one difference. Usually there's no differences, or there's inconsistent differences. Actually, Dr. Lanuti and I did a study a very long time ago where we looked at heterosexual and homosexual differences in jealousy, experience, and expression, and found almost nothing different.
Wow.
So regardless of whether you were a male or a female, or in a heterosexual relationship, or a gay male or a lesbian relationship, you pretty much, for the most part, express jealousy similarly.
And I just always find those types of results fascinating. Some people would say, well, that's no results, but to me, we make such a big deal about the different types of relationships and biological sex differences, and we just see a lot of times that, only 1 out of 12 categories was there any difference at all. So yeah. I find those types of things really interesting when we see those. In terms of, since you did write the book and have it published last year, so congratulations on that. That's amazing. And I have flipped through it. I don't have my own copy yet, but I did tell you before that.
I would have brought it.
I know, we should have. I did try to get a copy at the conference last year. But in terms of people who feel like they're jealous feelings, they don't want to feel this way, they wish that they would stop being such a jealous individual. Do you have any suggestions for people in terms of how to, even if they can't make it psychologically go away, how they can better deal with their jealousy in their relationships?
There is something called trait jealousy. Okay. So it can be just a trait that an individual unfortunately has. Certainly it can be exacerbated or kind of brought down a little bit depending upon the relationship that you're in and the communication that you're having with the partner. But yeah, that can absolutely be something. I don't want to call it an affliction, but it definitely means that you are more mindful and aware of the the interactions. You're going to be concerned about what is going on with your partner and where they are at any given time. I think just being open with your partner about that, and maybe even joking early on in the relationship that, oh, I'm just a jealous person, you just have to mind me, or something like that. I think that can be helpful. I think it will kind of let them know that that's something that you are managing and dealing with. And there are cases where people experience something called morbid jealousy, where it just really does mushroom out of control, and in those cases, it's absolutely something that you could seek therapy about, or talk to someone, and I believe it's part of some of the, I don't remember the exact diagnoses, but it's in the DSM.
Oh, okay.
As one of the symptoms for a number of different mental disorders.
Oh, okay. So very, very kind of serious.
Yeah, extreme. Very extreme.
So since you've had a thesis, dissertation, book, where are you at with jealousy as a topic now? Are you feeling done with it, or is there more to be explored?
When I started writing the book, I was on sabbatical, so I was sitting in my house for 7 months with this book looming in front of me, and I had it sketched out generally, and I had a publisher and everything, but I didn't know what was going to come out of it. Was I just going to end up reviewing research and just kind of going over everything and pulling everything together? Was I going to have any new ideas? And I was kind of worried that I wasn't going to have any new ideas because I had been studying for so long. I kind of had a flash one day of I had always wanted to put something together about a theory of jealousy that was from the communication perspective. There are some theories of jealousy. There are many different theories in psychology and communication that can be applied to jealous situations, but there was no true theory that really looked at communication as the central component that you could then look at different elements and maybe then predict how someone might express their jealousy. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of nagging at me, buzzing behind my ear the entire time I was working on the book. And then I kind of got a flash of this theory, which I'm going to talk about in the talk today. It's called jealousy expression profile theory. And basically it breaks down 4 different profiles of expression by 4 different kind of broad categories of expression, and then which kind of individual characteristics, so being female is one of them for one of the profiles. Relationship characteristics, are you in a dating relationship or are you married is another one. Are you satisfied in your relationship or dissatisfied? Emotional experiences, so what types of emotions are you experiencing? Fear, anger, just a general composite of jealousy emotions, and then thoughts, mostly worry about the jealousy and rumination, which is ongoing unwanted thoughts that you can't really get rid of and they're not really productive. So those all kind of came together, and the theory came together based on all the research that I had reviewed. And so I haven't really done a true test of it yet. I just kind of proposed it in the book based on the research that I'd looked at. And so now that's what I'm working on right now. Is I took all the different variables from the theory, put it into a study, looking at romantic partners right now, because they're kind of the best test case for jealousy, because romantic jealousy is probably one of the most allowed types of jealousy that you can have if you're in a romantic relationship. There's an expectation of exclusivity. So if something goes awry, you have the right sort of to be jealous. In a friendship, it's a little bit more difficult. So that's what we're testing right now. I have one of my undergrad classes, their senior capstone project, is they are assisting with collecting the data with that. And they're testing different parts of the relationships between the variables that we looked at in the theory. And so I felt like it was kind of becoming dormant, and then that happened, and so now I have sort of a renewed excitement about it, which I'm glad about, because I kind of missed it, so I'm kind of excited.
And you mentioned earlier on that people have so many misconceptions about jealousy, and I do want to get to some of the other research topics that you have, because you have so many different types of interests. And so in terms of summing this up, if there's one misconception that you could clarify now, what would you want to clarify for people?
My biggest issue is that people misuse jealousy when they're describing envy. They actually don't. They think it's the same thing, and they'll say, oh, you got a new car, I'm so jealous. That's actually inaccurate. Okay. Jealousy is about something that you possess, and you worry, even a relationship is a possession, technically, that you're worried about losing. Envy is about something that you wish to have, but that you don't have, and that someone else has, and you see them with it, and you experience that envy of, what you don't have. So if you see someone that says, I'm so jealous about your new car, that actually drives me crazy. Okay. I had that as a slide in the presentation for later today, and then I just ended up with time constraints, had to take it out. But that is one of the things that kind of, and rivalry is misused as well. So jealousy is kind of an umbrella category. And then also just people have such a negative connotation of jealousy. Right. They hate admitting that they're jealous. Sometimes we have to kind of dance around the word jealousy in a survey, even when we're asking people about it. It's not a bad thing to experience. It can show you that you care about your relationship, and that's always a good thing, I think. It's just how you express it is the important thing. If you express it constructively, if you are positive and you share and you don't accuse your partner and you don't hurt them in any way, then you're probably going to get positive dividends back, and it's probably going to be ultimately helpful. So that would be my spiel about jealousy and misconceptions.
Okay. And so it's great that you're continuing on with the research. I wasn't sure. A lot of people, once they finish a dissertation, and I haven't written a book, so I would imagine after a book, you do want some time off from it. And so something that I've seen that you've been doing more recently has to do with serial argumentation. And I just had a student actually stop in and say, I'm really excited to hear about this, because I get into the same argument with my girlfriend all the time. It's like we never end it. So first of all, can you just talk to us a little bit about what serial argumentation is in general?
Serial arguments is basically a fancy term for ongoing, unwanted conflict about one topic that goes unresolved, that you have multiple times. So if you have 2 conflicts, 2 arguments about putting the top back on the milk, you are technically in a serial argument. And these can span months, they can span the entire length of a relationship, they can span years, and they can never be resolved sometimes. So there can be obviously extremely frustrating. Many people can identify a serial argument that they have had or are currently having with someone that they are close to.
Okay. And so where are you currently at with research? Like what is the interest level, the focus of your research with serial argumentation?
It's really growing. It's great. I started doing the research with my dissertation advisor because he was actually interested in it first, and we started working on a project together about it. And there were a couple other scholars who were working on it who were at Northwestern. And it was kind of just us for a while working on it in tandem. And now it's really expanding. There's a lot more scholars who are doing it. Different names are publishing about it. And it's really exciting to see it kind of grow and take on a life of its own. Because I think that when we research conflict, I think what most of the time we're actually unintentionally researching are serial arguments. Because unless we tell someone in a romantic relationship, if you ask them to think about a conflict that's at the top of their mind, they're probably going to be thinking about one that is going unresolved or that they've had consistently or is particularly problematic in their relationship. So it's growing, and it's really fun to see.
Yeah. So far you've mainly been focusing on romantic relationships. Again, is this something that you've looked at with friends or roommates as of yet?
We've done some family research.
Okay.
One of the studies I published a few years ago, I compared parent-child relationships, and the children were adults, sibling relationships, also adults, and then romantic partners in terms of what their goals were in the conflicts and how they communicated. And my recollection is that there were little to no differences between the different relationship types. I think that one of the goals, which was about having control of the situation, was a bit more prominent for the parent-child pair because they have a control difference. They have a power differential naturally in their relationship, but they didn't express it any differently. So it seems like serial arguments, if it's a close relationship, you probably have one, and you're probably managing it similarly than if you were in a different type of close relationship, which is also kind of going back to the sex differences. It's like kind of something interesting.
Yeah, and so when I teach interpersonal relationships or interpersonal theories, I'll talk about the idea that sometimes you do have a taboo subject in your relationship, and that's okay to have one of those, and possibly to avoid this serial argumentation. It's almost like you said, it's irresolvable. So maybe we can just drop this and stop it. What would be your recommendation? Does it seem like there are certain serial arguments that we just need to drop, or is there something really ineffective that we're doing currently that we should correct to get past this issue?
The research has found consistently that the key is something called perceived resolvability. And so what that entails is your perception of whether or not this argument will ever be resolved. It might not be, if it's in reality, possible, but it's your perception of, okay, well, we made some progress here. I think that we could ultimately take care of this over time or deal with this in some fashion. Or you could be, no, we're never going to get this solved. It's just pointless. Perceived resolvability is really a big contributor in terms of how we communicate in the argument, whether we have constructive or destructive goals. It's even related to how much stress we experience after the argument's over and during the argument itself. So really being kind of reflective on your perceived resolvability of the argument, I think, would be one thing to try. Something that I've become more interested in recently is something called expressed perceived resolvability. So telling your partner where you think you are in terms of the resolvability of it and seeing what they say. And maybe if you match up with one another, you can agree to make it a taboo topic, which is perfectly acceptable. We shouldn't talk about everything and anything. Or if you both think that it's resolvable, maybe what can we do to get to that place? And how did we get to a place where we have that perceived resolvability being a little bit higher than maybe we anticipated? So the key, I think, right now is that idea of how resolvable you believe the argument is. And just even being aware of that and seeing how it changes from one argument episode to another can, I think, be really telling.
And so is your impression that when people are having the serial argument, that they get into the argument and then almost in a way don't even want to think about the conflict until they get into it again, and so they're not being mindful of it? Or do you think it's just that they feel like, I need to just keep going at this because I think eventually we've got to get it resolved if we keep talking about it? So do you see it as something like out of sight, out of mind unless I'm in the argument, or is it I really do believe that we can work this out, and that's why I keep bringing it up?
We have found that people ruminate quite
Okay.
frequently in between the episodes. So they're thinking about it, they're rehashing it, they're reflecting on it, they're worrying about it, and most of the time there are instances where rumination can be positive, where you can have a good idea come out of those thoughts, but most of the time it's not really that positive at all, and it really is unproductive to keep thinking about it and difficult to control. But we say it kind of bridges the arguments is what we're finding, and so you keep ruminating about it, and then you have that thought that keeps coming up, and maybe you think that if you bring it up again, it will help to abate the rumination, which most of the time doesn't.
Yeah.
So we don't have as much good news about serial arguments as we do about jealousy. I mean, you can communicate positively in a serial argument. And, a study I just did, we asked a group of the participants to tell us about a conflict that they had one time that they never had again with a close relationship partner, which actually a great number of participants had a difficult time even thinking of something like that. And then we had the rest of the participants think about a serial argument. And then we called them non-serial and serial arguments. And we compared experiences between the two. And we found that the serial arguers actually used more constructive, positive conflict strategies than the non-serial arguers. Wow. So even though the bridge might be negative in the rumination and the negative goals and so forth, they are still working hard in the conflicts themselves. They don't kind of have that white rage. They kind of take over and act really inappropriately and meanly toward one another, but they do seem to really want to try and make the effort to work it out. And maybe it's the awareness that this conflict is just going on, and we don't know that yet. That's probably the next step, but it was kind of, we were actually shocked when we realized, we thought, oh, well, if it's a non-serial argument that happened once, they're probably really nice to each other in the argument, and they get it taken care of, and we actually found the opposite, that they were mean to each other or avoided the argument entirely.
Wow.
So that was one kind of ray of positive hope in the serial argument literature, that they do tend to come at it a little bit more positively.
And that's interesting, because the jealousy, like you said, has such a negative connotation, and then we have this serial argumentation that seems to be so much more negative than where we're at.
The message with serial arguments that I always tell people, and this is a message with general conflict overall, is that you don't have to be nicer, you just have to be less mean.
Okay.
In terms of health benefits, in terms of health, there's so many research studies that have found that there's negative health implications. It's not turning, if every instinct in those situations is often to be mean, if you can just be less mean, be less hurtful towards your partner, just be more neutral, that actually is more helpful. I know it's really difficult to try to be positive, so just working to be less negative.
Well, thank you very much, because you've given us some theoretical information, then some actual practical things that we can work on, and just a lot of interesting information that can help us with our relationships. So thank you very much. Once again, this is Dr. Jennifer Bevan from Chapman University visiting us here at Salle University, Dr. Katie Dunleavy, and I thank you for listening, and I hope that this can help you all in some of the dark elements of your own relationships.